Hello, I'm your 3D CG guru, Nathaniel Albright, and in this video I am going to talk about some different techniques you can use to clean up motion capture inside of Cascadeur as it relates to animation cycles. If you haven't already watched the official Cascadeur video where they give different demonstrations of tools and techniques you can use to clean up your motion capture, I would highly advise you watch that first. This is just some additional information that I've experienced or have discovered as I've gone through the process myself. Now, this video series, once again, is specifically related to creating cycles inside of Cascadeur. Since Cascadeur doesn't have any retargeting abilities built in, I've already retargeted my mocap inside of Maya and I've exported an FBX. So the first thing I need to do is to go ahead and just do an import that animation in, and we'll be cleaning up a run cycle. Once the animation is imported, we get the new time range. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to that time range and we'll just open that up. I'll right click on my sub time slider there, if you will. And then I'm going to go ahead and frame my view to see where this motion capture is. So here's my motion capture. The first thing I like to do is I like to isolate where the motion actually starts. So I'll just advance my timeline here until I start to see movement. So I know at frame 99 and before I don't need anything, so I'll just left click and drag, and then I will Alt F to remove those keys. Then I'm going to go ahead and left click and drag to highlight the rest of my motion, and I will middle click and drag that over to the start frame. Now my time ends at 1:41, so I'm going to go ahead and clamp to that like so. All right, so we have this motion, and another thing I like to do is, and I'll do this a couple different times, but I like to go ahead and get my animation starting from the center line. So I'm going to look from the top-down view and go into a non-perspective mode here. So we got this isometric view. Then I need to move this character to the center, and to do that I will select my time range, and then I'm going to go ahead and enable the interval edit mode and make sure that I'm in stepped mode here. So it's the stepped kind of icon there. That's enabled. I'll go ahead and jump to frame 0, and then I'm just going to move my character like so. That stepped mode allows me to essentially move all of those keyframes with a consistent offset applied based off of what I do with my gizmo. So I'm not getting completely perfect here, but I'm trying to get it roughly centered. We'll clean that up a little bit more later after I've actually identified a cycle within this longer section of mocap. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my character running down the z-axis. So I'll go ahead and turn on rotation, and I'll swing this around until it looks like my end of the cycle is roughly lining up to the center line of the world, like so. All right, so now I can go ahead to the front view and I'll frame my selection, and I'm just going to hit run or play. Now, one of the things with the mocap you may notice here is that it actually starts with a stand and goes into a run. And then we have a number of cycles before the motion capture comes to an end. So the next thing I like to do is I like to identify where I might have a cycle that starts. So this motion capture has multiple cycles. Some of those will be good, some of those will not be. And so what I will do, let's go ahead and just turn off the interval edit mode, is I'm just going to go through my motion capture here and identify points of essentially impact. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark any frame where the foot looks like it has completed its plant. So I have some motion here, and then it looks like right here is the first frame where there's no movement of the foot. If I go down here, on frame 54, you'll see just the smallest amount. Of 55, it looks totally stationary. So I'm going to go ahead and just mark that as an important frame. And I don't know if my cycle is going to start with the left or the right foot. So I'm going to do this on both. So we do this again here. I'm going to scrub forward again. And just a little bit longer here. So we'll say this one. There's a little bit of motion, but I think that might just be a drift in the mocap. And then we'll go one more here. Let's see. Might as well just take it all the way to the end. Really, usually if you get motion capture like this, the beginning of the cycle and the end of the cycle are not going to be good. Because the character is slowing down, we can see the angle of the torso here. He's leaning forward and then he starts to straighten up. And then obviously here at the beginning, he's got a lot of kind of like initial super low angle here that he's going to straighten up into. So these first cycles are not going to be any good. But let's see if we can identify a part of a cycle that will be good. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say anything before this first plant, I'll go ahead and nuke. It'll just make it easy to see. So Alt F, and then anything past here, I'll go ahead and hit Alt F on. Okay, so let's take this and I'm going to hit the space bar button to give me two views, and I'll look at the front view here. And I want to go ahead and make that isometric as well. And I'm going to set this to our control rig. All right, so here's a little trick. What I can do if I select just the hip control here, or the main pelvis control, I'll select that and I'm going to lock my camera to it. Make sure that is locked there. So now when I scrub, even though he's moving through space, my camera is locked. And I'm going to do the same thing with my front view here. So once again, I'll just enable this and lock that. Okay, so now even if there is some slight drift left to right, this camera will track that. So now I can go in and just bring in this timeline here like so. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit S to hide the control rig, and I'm going to look for any frames where it looks like the poses are similar. Now, because I'm planting every other foot, I need to skip one of my critical frames here. So we can see here there's a lot of movement in the torso, so I don't want to use that as my cycle. Uh, he's still kind of lifting up here, so we go from here to here, and then we go from 98 to 119, and now it looks like he's leaning back. So none of those seem to be really good cycles. Let's try 66 to 88, still leaning back, 88 to 109. So this really seems to be um, our best cycle. So 88 to 109. So I'll go ahead and just select everything before this. Let's just right click, and I'll once again Alt F to nuke those keys. We've got our 109, so I'll take 110 beyond. If I hit Alt F once and I've overshot the selection, you'll see it adds a new key. So I hit it a second time to remove those keys. All right, now let's take this and one more time, let's move this to the beginning of the animation. And we want to go all the way to frame 21, like so. And then at this point, I would also like to go ahead and just correct that position in space. So I want to always start at the world 0. So I'll just, once again, do that interval edit mode. In stepped mode, I will take this and I'm just going to translate this back. And look at that, I totally messed up. It's definitely important that you grab all of the controllers here. So let's do this like so. Okay, so we'll do that. Now what I could do this time, I could spend a little more time with this. So if I look from the side view, what I want to do is I'm going to ignore the center of gravity, which is the long blue line there, and I'm just going to get the small little blue cross at the bottom, which represents the hip or the pelvis projected to the ground, kind of centered up. And I'll go from the front view and I'll go ahead and square this up here as well, like so. Okay, so now there could be some drift as this animation is going. And I'm going to go ahead at this point and turn off my locked camera. So I'll turn that off. So if I run here and we see at the end, it drifts a little bit. If we go down in here, you can see it's a little to the right. So I'm going to correct this. I still have this time range selected, but rather than doing this in the stepped mode, I'm going to do it in a linear mode. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of straighten this out a little bit so that the blue cross now is more right on the center line. This doesn't have to be perfect, and in this case it was such a small drift it probably really wouldn't matter that much. There is a little foot slide now because of that. You'll see the poses don't quite align at this point. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to get this to actually cycle cleanly, and we have two different options here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get this animation to be a cycle in place. And we can do that really easily if I just select the interval edit mode. I marquee select all of my controls. And then from there, I'm going to go ahead and make sure my blend mode here is set to this kind of linear. I'm going to take the first pose and I'll just Control C to copy that. And then I'll go over to the end pose and I'll paste that like so. So if we look at this now, frame 0 and the end should be the same, but they're not. You'll notice the fingers don't match one another. So the other thing that we need to do when you're pasting these poses like this, rather than being in the controller mode here, point controller mode, we actually want to be in this box controller mode. So we'll do that again. We're going to select this. I will copy and then I'll go to the end here and I'll paste. And now as we jump from start to end, our animation looks the same. Okay, so that is the first thing we can do to actually get a cycle here that looks like it should be clean. So if I hit play, there we go. Now there could obviously be motion capture cleanup on this that we need to do, but the actual cycle seems to be looping correctly. Now, the other thing that I want to check is I'm curious about the pose, because in this case, what I did was I pasted the first pose to the end and I ensured that the ends of the animation will cycle cleanly, but I didn't really do anything about the middle of the motion. So ideally, if we want something that feels very kind of generic, I guess, and doesn't have any variation, and I'm not sure you want to do that. Obviously, one of the nice things about mocap is we get a lot of subtleties in it. But if we were talking about like a hand-keyed animation that was generic, what we'd really expect when we went into silhouette mode is that the first frame and 50% of the animation, the pose would be the same like this. In this case, you can see there is some deviation. Now, in this case, if I select the keys in between frames 0 and 10, I have 9 frames in between here. And now 11 to 20, I have 10. So there's also a difference of the spacing here. These do not quite align. So another thing you might want to do is you might want to try to get your cycle to be completely 100% mirrored so that the first 50% matches the last 50% as far as the frame count goes. So if you do care about making sure the 50% is on a nice clean number, or you want your poses to match 100%, we're going to do something different rather than just posting the start pose to the end pose. Okay, so what we're going to do is essentially we're going to take this animation. Let's get out of the silhouette mode here. And we're going to go ahead and just delete everything here on. So we only have the first half of the cycle. And I'm going to go ahead and nuke those poses. Now I'm going to take this first pose, I'm going to copy it, Control C. I'm going to go to frame 11. I'm going to use frame 11 as just like a buffer. And I'm going to paste this in. Now, remember, we need to set a key initially before we can paste into it. So now frames 0 and 11 are a perfect match. Now I'm going to take frame 11 and I'm going to go ahead and mirror that pose. So I'll take these controls, I'll go to the mirror tool, and mirroring on the X plane, I'm going to mirror just the current frame. All right, so if we look at this in 3D space, our feet should be pretty close to one another. There's now just essentially we can see the delta between the two poses, but they are both mirrors of one another. Okay, so now I want to take this pose and I want to paste it into here. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to take my timeline here and I'm going to go back to some point where the foot is off the ground. I don't want to mess with any poses where the foot is actually making contact with the ground. So maybe even on frame 5 I could, but I'm going to do frame 6 here. So I've copied this, I select this, I'll go ahead and enable that interval edit mode with a linear blend, and then I'm going to paste this in. So the linear blend, it essentially means 100% of the paste happens where my current time is, and it feathers that effect off. So by frame 6, we don't really have any real difference. So now we have these two poses. I can take frame 11, I can go ahead and just delete that key at that point. So I'll just Alt F. All right, so now we have an animation that should be blending nicely. Now I can just take this entire range and I'm going to go ahead and select this and I'll hold down Shift and drag it and I'll make a copy. And now that I've done that, my feet are um, on the wrong side again. So I have this cycle, I copied it over. Now I just need to simply take this. I'm going to say mirror on the current interval. And when I do that, let's make sure we actually have everything selected here. Okay, so there we go. So now my new cycle is ends on frame 20 instead of 21. Let's go ahead and look at this from the front. All right. So there we go. Now we have something where we have a consistent number of in-between frames. We have 9 here, and we have 9 frames here. So this frame 10 is going to be a perfect 50% of the way through the cycle of the animation. So to help me be able to view this animation and really get a sense of what's happening with the motion, rather than playing at real time, I'm actually going to go into the playback settings and we'll just turn this to a time factor of 0.3. So now we can get slow motion and we can see the interpolation of the poses in between the keys and we get a better sense of what's actually happening here with the motion itself. Honestly, I don't think the mocap is too bad. If I was in production and I had a couple thousand animations to deal with, I would probably not spend much more time on this other than having it move back through space. But for the sake of this, let's just do a little bit of cleanup. So one thing that we can see as I scrub here is that the foot does clip a little bit, and so I will want to clean that up. Now, it also clips under the ground plane here a little bit on frame 3, and so I have some choices here of how I want to do this. Um, but honestly, I think this is a case where I might want to kind of touch that up once the motion is uh, moving through space, because I'll have a better ability to adjust the toes and the feet and not lose the placement of the plant. So moving it through space, I can verify I have a good plant, and then if I make foot adjustments, I can use the ghosting around it to make sure things are good. So I'm not going to deal with the clipping of the foot right now. And the other thing that I kind of noticed is we might say that the knees, as they're coming through uh, the passing pose, that they might be a little tight to one another. You could say that maybe there's some clipping there. Honestly, once again, it happens so fast, I don't think most people are going to notice. You could argue that there's cloth there and that explains it, but let's go ahead and kind of fix it up anyway. So I'm going to go to a pose that I feel is good and there is no issue. So here we have frame 6, and I'm going to find some pose that also doesn't have any issues past the point where I believe there are issues. So we'll do frame 16. I just did a left click and drag to select that interval. We'll enable this again. And then we'll just jump back to where the main clip happens. And in that interval edit mode, I'm just going to be set to a linear. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the just what essentially is that pull vector for this. And I'll just pull that out a little bit. And now we should get that clipping avoided. Um, we can do the same thing here for this leg, but the one challenge here is um, it happens at the beginning of the interval. So I need to make an adjustment, but I also need to apply that adjustment on the last half. So where I made this adjustment, let's say from 11 to 6, here's like I'm going to be doing 11 to 16 and then doing another pass to 11 to 6. So I'll start in frame 0 and I'll just advance to, let's say, frame 6 here, jump back and just grab this point and just pull this back like so, as that's where the clipping is starting to happen. Now I will copy that pose, and when I copy this pose, let's just do the whole character here because everything should be good like this. Now I'll go to frame 20 and I'll go back to 16. where I know that there's no clipping. And then let's jump back here, and then I'll just paste this pose like that. And if I go between the first and end frame, shouldn't see any issues, and then I can go ahead and hit play. All right, there we go. Let's go ahead and get this character moving through space. So select your range, go ahead and grab the main controllers here. We'll go to the right view. I'm going to turn on ghosting, and I'm just going to ghost the entire range. Why not? Then I'm simply going to pull this forward in the linear edit mode, and we'll do something like this. When I am doing this, if you have both views up, you can use essentially one to really check the foot placement, and then we can use the other one to adjust whatever we need to adjust as far as distance goes. If the toes weren't clipping, I would probably line this up so that the feet are rolling off the balls of the foot, and the toes there at the end, the toe tip. But in this case, because I know there's a little bit of drifting in the foot there, I'm going to use this kind of heel placement instead in the back. So I'll just pull this back a bit so it looks like these are ghosting correctly. Okay, so let's go ahead and then fix what we see with the actual foot plant shifting here. So we'll say frame 11, and let's just go back to this view. So 11 is good, 13 is good. Really, frame 14 and is where we had the first major issue. On frame 13, it's clipping on the ground a little bit, so I could just take this just for this frame and just pull this up a bit. Let's make sure we actually have frame 13 selected here. So I can pull that up like that. The foot is a little under the ground for all of these, so what I might actually want to do is let's do this a little bit different. Let's just grab all of these, and I'll go to stepped mode, and then I'll just pull this up here like this. Okay. And now we have a bad pose here with the foot plant, and we could say we want to blend that. So maybe I'm going to do something like this, and I'll do that linear. And just going to try to get that toe looking like it's rolling off of the tip there. I'll take my ghost down to just 1 so I can see where the last frame was compared to the current frame. There we go. And then let's just check this other foot here that starts our cycle. So we have the same thing here. With this one, I'm going to turn interval edit mode off. And I'm just going to pull this up a little bit. Let's actually... Yeah, depends on how nitpicky we really want to be. It's under the ground a little bit, but it's not a big deal. Let's just take this and just start to pull it up a little bit. So here I'm just correcting on that one frame. All right, and then frame 4 is really where we had that same issue with the foot roll. So I'm going to say for like 4 to 7 or 4 to 8. So we'll do 4 to 8. All right, so now we should be good to go. Let's go ahead and turn the ghosting off. Yeah, so I like the way that's looking. And now we have a cycle complete. The other thing you might want to do is, check the hands. I think in this case, they're not really clipping or anything. So we're done.